guys, so I know that it's not necessarily 2025 yet, but it's getting pretty close, and I know for a fact that I am not going to finish any other books this year because my parents got me a podcast subscription that I've been waiting for Christmas, and I've been catching up on podcasts that I couldn't previously listen to. So I know that that's what I'll be doing for the next couple of days of the new year. So I wanted to bring you guys my best and the worst of 2024. 2024 was not one of my better reading years in terms of number of things. I got to almost 80 books, I think about 78 books that I read this year. Normally I read 100 or more, but this year I also had a lot of different things happen, like I've talked about in some of my life updates. And so, you know what, 78 plus a PhD is, or trying to get a PhD at least, is pretty respectable, I think. But it did, however, lead itself to some very interesting things within this video. Normally I try to do my top 5 and my bottom 5. That's not exactly what happened. I only had 4 books that I ended up rating under 3 stars. 3 stars for me is okay. Anything less than that might deserve to be on a worst of list. And of course, I don't add books that I DNF to my worst of list. I didn't finish them. I don't know how they end. And I don't think that it's fair to put them on a worst of list just because they were not a book for me. My 5-star reads were a lot of nonfiction, and I was trying to figure out a way to kind of talk about those and also represent some romance novels. And so what I've decided to do is split my 5-star reads into 3 categories, and I'll give you my top 2 books in each of those 3 categories, so 6 top books, and then I'll just talk about those 4 books that I rated under 3 stars that I finished, because that's my actual worst of this year. So it's still 10 books, they're just weighted slightly differently. So without further ado, we will start with the best ofs, and then we will end with the worst ofs when I can lose my mind without having to do any more talking about good books. So because I read a lot of good nonfiction this year, and I also kind of diversified my nonfiction a little bit this year, what I've decided to do with my top 3 best of categories is split it into my 2 best books in a category I'm roughly calling history and politics, because that's like a lot of like poli-sci history, like all that type of stuff I kind of wrap together, and I'll just kind of talk about those 2. My top 2 true crime books, and then my top 2 romance books, because honestly this year I read a lot of okay romance. I didn't read a lot of great romance, and so I really want to highlight the 2 books that I actually rated really, really highly over the course of this year. So to start off with, in my top 2 best of history and politics, or whatever this category is, the first book that I want to talk about is The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory, American Evangelicals in an Age of Extremism by Tim Alberta. Now, while I haven't been able to actually do a history book video about all of the different religion, evangelical, like all those types of poli-sci, either some are memoirs, some are more nonfiction-y, books that I've been reading this year, I've read a lot of them. And some have been okay, some have been good, and some have been great. And the Tim Alberta book is absolutely the best of the best. I rated this book 5 stars back in February, and it is this amazing mix of research and personal history blended into such a way that it's an incredibly compelling read, but also because Tim Alberta still has his faith and is the son of a minister in the evangelical faith, and like who started a church, there's a whole family history with that. I feel like Alberta's book gives more of a voice to the parts of the evangelical church that are committed to reform, and those who are actually like going down this extremist road, which I feel like in a lot of them there's either like one or the other. It's much more binary. And because Alberta himself is struggling so personally with some of these issues, it just adds a level of weight and care and interest and passion that some of these other books that I've read just don't have. It is on the bigger side, so of course it's one that you really have to commit to, but out of all of the titles that have come out along this road, if you're looking for something that's got the personal, like memoir touch to it, but is also focused on research and explanation, This is an incredible melding of those two genres that I highly recommend. So my other best history and politics book of this year is Keeping the Faith, God, Democracy, and the Trial That Riveted a Nation by Brenda Wineapple. Now this might sound like something that seems incredibly similar to the book that I was just talking about, but this book by Wineapple is a straight history nonfiction book. So this is the story of the Scopes monkey trial, which basically was a trial that decided whether or not evolution could or should be taught in schools. At the time, some states had laws banning the teaching of evolution in schools, which is why it gets called the Scopes monkey trial, even though the person who brought it, his name was John Scopes. It should have just been the Scopes trial. Monkeys were involved, obviously evolution, it's the whole thing. This was the type of book that I picked up actually off Spotify audiobooks. I was in between my audiobook holds from the library. This book I was not really aware of, but I had read Brenda Wineapple's book on the impeachment trial of Andrew Johnson. And I had really enjoyed her writing. And so I thought, oh, this seems interesting. It's not that long. I'll just, listen to it while I'm waiting for a book that I've actually put on hold from the library to come in. Once I started listening to this book, I could not stop. So the Scopes trial took place in 1925, and rather than just being focused on the trial itself, the book really digs into deep, biographical information of the two lawyers that will end up arguing for either side. One lawyer you probably haven't heard of before, or at least I hadn't. His name was Clarence Darrow, and he has a really, really interesting history of being a lawyer in some really important cases during that time, mostly around social justice, but not always, which is interesting. But the person who was the lawyer for the side preaching creationism was actually William Jennings Bryan, who was really, really famous around this time. He had run for president multiple times, obviously not won, but he's a really, really important political figure of the time who has gone back to being a lawyer after his political runs. I think he ran 3 times for president, have not really worked out for him. By doing this, Wineapple is able to set up not only the story of the trial itself, but also really sink you into the socio-cultural setting of where the country has been and has moved to within the lifetimes of William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow. They kind of bring them to this moment. I literally could not stop listening to this audiobook. If someone tried to interrupt me, I was basically just a really angry gremlin because I was just so hooked on the story. I absolutely did not expect it. And it was not necessarily a period of history that I was super excited to learn about. But of course, when you think about it, the story of whether or not evolution should be allowed in schools, it actually does have plenty of historical echoes to current conversations that we are having. So Wineapple is able to do that and make those connections in a way that's not super heavy-handed. Keeps the story really, really interesting, but obviously makes this story really, really relevant to our current moment with just such an engaging writing style. Like I said, I enjoyed her book on the impeachment of Andrew Johnson, but this book is just so good, and I highly, highly recommend it. So one genre that I really, really expanded my reading of this year was true crime nonfiction. I've been watching a lot of true crime shows and documentaries over the past couple of years, but I really hadn't delved too much into the genre. Obviously, I've talked ad nauseum about You'll Be Gone in the Dark, which is a true crime book by Michelle McNamara that Michaela got me into reading, and then I watched the documentary of, and it was this whole thing. But past that, I hadn't really been doing a lot of reading, except for this year when I did a lot of true crime reading for some reason. And so that's my second category. I want to bring you guys up close to 2 really, really good true crime books that I would recommend for everyone. So the first book that I want to talk about is The Devil at His Elbow, Alex Murdaugh and the Fall of a Southern Dynasty by Valerie Bauerlein. I'm not sure if I'm saying her last name right, but I'm trying. I am the kind of person who, once I hear about like a certain trial or something, like we were all there when I went through my excessively heavy Theranos like rabbit hole situation, and the Murdaugh murders with the boat crash and then the rest of the family getting murdered, the whole connection to the Southern history and dynasty. I was really, really fascinated by this story. And obviously a lot of other people are. So this year, a lot of different books have come out trying to kind of contain this really generational story about the Murdaugh family in the South. I've tried a number of them and I've DNF'd plenty of them. Some of them were just not good. And so when Devil at His Elbow was recommended to me, I really even wasn't sure if I wanted to try another one because I have been so burnt by some of the other books about this family. Bauerlein has absolutely done it right. She is somehow able to contain the story that you know or might know bits of, the more, current story, going back and forth between our time and the past time and making those things connect. Also without it seeming like that history that was before Alec Murdaugh and all these things really happened just seems to overwhelm the book, which has been a problem in a lot of the other ones. That history is just, it's a slog to get through and it's overwhelming. And Bauerlein just figured out how to get it all into one book in an incredibly compelling narrative that makes sense and makes the connections. It's well researched, it's well written. And so as someone who has read and watched a bunch of different properties on this is without a doubt the top of the line in terms, for me at least, in terms of reporting on this whole case. I offer this to you in case you too are looking at all of the different books that came out this year and you're like, ugh, some of these haven't been good, or how do I choose? This is the one. Like, hands down, not even a question, this is the book. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about this next book because Michaela and I did a whole big long review of it that I will link up above, but I absolutely cannot let my best true crime of the year list not include Lay Them to Rest on the Road with the Cold Case Investigators Who Identify the Nameless by Laura Norton. I think Michaela and I were originally caught by this book because the cover is incredible. I don't do a lot with cold cases because I like reading things where people are caught. I don't, it makes me feel a little uncomfortable sometimes to know that sometimes there are still some murderers hanging out around there. But this book, again, follows a cold case investigator. Laura Norton also runs a podcast where she talks about this. And it is one of the just best true crime books that I've read in general, because it is so attentive and caring of the victims and so well researched and also explanatory about how the science works as well, because sometimes true crime books are really focused on like the juicy popcorn bits and like the chase, the cops, the this, and there is like a lot of science, first of all, that goes into this. And we shouldn't be sensationalizing the murderers and forgetting about the victims. And I think Michaela and I kind of titled our video about this like ethical true crime ? Because it was so incredible how attentive this book was to the ethics of crime and of solving crimes, focusing on how, for example, in cold cases, a lot of the people who end up as cold cases, nameless cold cases, are often people of color, people who were left, uncared for in society during their lives and now don't have a lot of resources in their deaths put towards finding out, what happened to them. And every person matters and their death should be accounted for. There's discussion of Indigenous rights, right? And the idea of repatriation and how a lot of museums or even just rich people in general ended up with Indigenous bones that need to go back to the tribes in the land from whence they were stolen. It's just, I don't want to talk about it at length because Michaela and I did a good review where we actually talked like smart people. Michaela was there to actually make sure smart things were said. But in terms of a true crime book that actually like came up and really snuck up on me, I think, with how good it was. Again, even if you're not someone who usually reads a lot about cold cases, I just, in terms of, again, ethical, true crime, science, explanation, and just really feeling care for this victim and the process, and it's just really, really good. It's emotionally good, it's scientifically good, it's ethically good, and I think more people should read it. Now, switching over to a very different genre, let's talk about my top 2 romance books of this year. And the first, the best, the number one without a doubt was The X-Vows by Jessica Joyce. Again, I did a whole review on this book that I will link up above so you can watch it, but Jessica Joyce also made one of my best of lists the year that her debut novel came out, and I am incredibly happy to see that this book, The X-Vows, also makes this list. She is just an author that really seems to work for me. The X-Vows is a second chance romance where 2 people who kind of like existed in the same friend group end up back together to help plan the wedding of 2 of their mutual friends. And of course, there's super major hijinks with the wedding. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong. And so our 2 protagonists end up having to work together to not just plan this wedding, but like basically plan an emergency wedding, which is very stressful, and they end up spending a lot of time together. But it was just so emotional and good, and really focuses not only on their relationship, but how their relationships have affected their friend group and why they broke up. And second chance romances have this ability to really delve deep into what happens when you meet like the right person at the wrong time, or what self-growth you need to do to kind of be someone who's ready to be in a serious relationship. This book covers all of those things while being set at a gorgeous winery setting. And you should go watch my full review for more details, but I read a lot of second chance romances, okay? It's my favorite trope this year, hands down, no contest. And when I say this is the best of the best, it is the best of the best. Perhaps unsurprisingly, my other top book of the year was also a second chance romance, just not quite as good as The X-Vows, and we'll talk about that. It is also a repeat author, which is fantastic because I also really love this author. So my other best top romance novel of the year was Right on Cue by Fallon Ballard. I have deeply adored every single book Fallon Ballard has ever written, except for the latest one, which is a Christmas one, and I haven't read it yet. So I don't like Christmas romances, which is a hot take, but it's fine. Right on Cue is a second chance story between our 2 protagonists. They both used to be in show business, but they were co-leads on a production where they kind of sort of fell in love and then had like a really traumatic breaking apart, to the point where our female lead has actually like left the acting jobs altogether. She's become a screenwriter, and she is getting the chance to helm her own like production for the first time, bringing one of her self-written movies to life. She has the cast all put together, but at the last minute, the guy who signed on to be her male lead has to pull out, and they bring in a new guy, and it happens to be, you guessed it, the guy who broke her heart and knocked her out of acting all those years ago. I have found in the past that Ballard's books, the other ones that I've read, and I've reviewed all of these on my channel so you can find them, the other ones that I've read have been a little bit more emotionally deep than this one, which is why I don't think it's quite as good as The X-Vows. But please understand that Ballard has set such a high bar with her other books that, you know, her not reaching that does not make it a bad book by any means. Again, it's my second top rated romance novel of the year. It's super cute, it's emotional, it's lovely, and it's really, really cute. This one in particular was just like so cute and such a fun way to spend time. Again, you can go see my full review for more, but like The X-Vows is like tops emotional, cute, amazing, and Right on Cue is just like cute and adorable. And those are my top 2 romances of the year. All right, now it's the moment you've all been waiting for. what were my worst books of the year. And again, there's 4 of these. They were rated anywhere from 2.5 stars to 1.5 stars down at the bottom. And we are going to go from least worst to most worst. I think that's a scale, right? So these are going to be in a specific order. And let me tell you, when I wrote this list out and I realized what author was at the bottom of this list, I was massively shocked. Like 400% just mouth open. So we're going to talk about that, but we have to get there first. So top of the worst list is No One Does It Like You by Katie Shepherd. I did a full review of this. I'll link to it up above. But this book was just ridiculous. This book is a second chance romance, and it involves refurbing an old inn. There's a hurricane involved. The male lead has become like a famous actor, and fangirls show up and like help them refurb the inn. It is like just 17,000 different types of ridiculous. And I'm not saying necessarily that that's like a bad thing if that's what you want out of a romance novel, right? Like sometimes we read romance novels for that level of ridiculous, but this one just kept going and going, and I was like, there is just nothing in this that makes any sense at all. It's really, really silly. I have a lot of questions. I just had a really hard time with this one. And so only read this one if you're ready to like firmly suspend disbelief, because that's the only way that you can really get through it, because I just was like, I just can't anymore with this one. Next on the list is The Lodge by Kayla Olson. I actually just reviewed this one at the end of the year. Again, I'll link that up above. I did this in a multi-review video about rockstar romances because I literally did not have enough feelings about this book to write a full review of it itself, because like, it's fine, but like not the kind of fine where I would give it 3 stars. Like there's just not that much to it, to like an annoying level. So this one has a woman who is ghostwriting a autobiography for a famous boy band, previous member of a boy band, and another member of the same boy band like disappeared like 10 years ago. And when she gets sent to a ski lodge in Vermont to help her write the book, she falls in love with a hot ski instructor, and it's a very convoluted plot. I don't really know why, but there's just not a lot to it. There's just very little to it. I honestly have trouble even now saying much about it because it was a book. I read it. It happened. At least No One Does It Like You, which is why it comes first in this list, best of the worst, if you will, has some ridiculous elements, and you can get a good giggle out of it. The Lodge is just like, eh. So that's what it is. It's eh. Go watch that multi-review video for some way better rockstar romances coming out in January 2025. One nonfiction book does make this list, and that is The Rise of Andrew Jackson, Myth, Manipulation, and the Making of Modern Politics by David and Jean Heidler. I don't know what this book was supposed to be, but when I tell you it was not a discussion of how Andrew Jackson helped to make modern politics, I don't know why that's the title. Really, this is just like a step-by-step accounting of the presidential campaign of Andrew Jackson. And when I say step-by-step, I mean tiny step by tiny step. And I was so bored. And honestly, I think the only reason that I finished it was because I was like, okay, eventually this book will get to a point where it's going to say, okay, all of these things that we've talked about, this historical stuff about the campaign, now we're going to relate it to modern politics in a more expansive way, right? As like the nonfiction book kind of does normally at the end when it kind of like wraps it all together. No, the book just ends. I actually thought there was something wrong with my audiobook loan from the library because the book just ended. And I said, well, that can't possibly be the end because that was the end. I spent all of that time plodding through tiny little political decisions for the book to just end. This was honestly incredibly aggravating, and I really, really wish that I had stuck to my original thought, which was to just DNF the book and not get it back, because it took me so long to read this that I needed like multiple library loans. I should have just let it go, because let me tell you, this book is going nowhere fast, and no one needs to read it. Go read a different Andrew Jackson book if you must. This one is painful. All right, guys, it's time for my lowest rated book of the year. And I cannot believe that this author is here. This author regularly makes my best of lists and has made my worst of list. And not just my worst of list, but my worst rated book. I rated this book 1.5 stars. And after Michaela and I reviewed it, I honestly don't know if it even deserved that. So my worst rated book of the year is Dark Restraint by Katie Roberts. Dark Restraint is the most recent book and at point of filming in the Dark Olympus series. It's like number 7 or something, so I do not want to get deep into the plot in case you haven't read this series yet. Michaela and I have read and reviewed almost every single one. I reviewed the first book, Neon Gods, on my own, and we've done every other book together since. Yes, by the time you write this many books in a series, some are going to be better than others, but Michaela and I both adore Katie. We love her books. And yes, some are better than others, but until her pirate series recently, we have not had one that has like significantly flopped. This is worse than the pirate series, guys. Worse. I can't believe I'm saying that. And the reason, the major reason is that this book is a dark romance, right? But Katie is normally so good at consent and having her characters communicate, and, you know, whenever something sexual is happening, making sure that everybody is consenting and aware and involved, and like, she's the best at that. I don't know what happened in this book. This book is dangerous. This book is got lack of consent all over the place in some really, really disturbing ways that completely and utterly shocked both me and Michaela. The relationship feels really toxic and not one that I want to read a romance novel about, which is a huge problem for me. I mean, if I didn't love this series and want this book to move the plot along and obviously be reviewing it with Michaela, would I have even finished it once I realized how like awful this relationship was? Probably not. Because this is like my hard stop in romance novels, is when they are toxic, when consent is not involved. No thank you. I don't know what happened here, because this is so not like Katie. It honestly just feels like mind-boggling. Like I have no concept of how this happened. Again, Michaela and I did a full review of this book, so you can see both of us kind of losing our minds about it. I just still can't, like I said, when I knew I didn't like this book. Michaela and I read it, I think it was our first review of 2024 back in January. So maybe I had forgotten quite how low I rated it, I don't know. But when I realized this on Storygraph, I was like, on the one hand, so shocked, but also like, oh yeah, of course that was the worst book that I read this year, because it was probably the worst romance and most dangerous romance novel I read all year. Michaela and I already do have the arc of the next book in this series, which obviously we will read and hopefully will be done better. Besides this book, again, there are some we've liked better than others, but besides this book, it's been quite a stable, good series that I do recommend to people. But wow, this one was a shock, and I hope that she hardcore self-corrects in the next one, because that was some yikes. But that is the end of my worst of list. So again, I have my top 6 books, 3 categories, 2 top in each, and then these just the 4 books that I rated in 2024 under 3 stars. I really hope in 2025 that I am able to put aside the time to just read more. I know that 78 books is like, some people find that still a really high number. For me, I just read over 100 on average, so it does mean that it was a below average year for me. But also that's how life goes. And so as I have to do my dissertation, hopefully in 2025, it's quite possible I will read even less, but I will hopefully read better Katie Robert romances in 2025 than whatever the heck Darkness Strain was. And whether we do or whether we don't, Michaela and I will be here on this channel to tell you about it. So we will see you for more of that in 2025. Thanks, guys. Bye.